My wife brought her boyfriend to our Christmas dinner and said, "Kids, meet your new stepdad." I smiled, poured whiskey, and gave a toast that made him leave without his coat. By New Year's, she understood what she'd actually done. The bottle of Blanton's I had been saving for 3 years was still in my hand when the front door opened, and I heard a voice I did not recognize. Not my wife's voice. A man's. Younger. That particular register men use when they are performing ease in a situation where they feel none. Low, slightly too relaxed, projecting confidence they've rehearsed in the mirror of a car visor on the drive over. I set the bourbon on the sideboard. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. I walked out of the kitchen and into my own living room, where my wife of 12 years was standing next to a man I had never seen before, her hand through his arm, wearing the expression of someone who has been building toward a moment they have decided to stop delaying. Our kids, Caleb, 10, and Sophie, 7, were on the couch in their Christmas pajamas looking at the 3 adults in the room, with the particular focused attention children deploy when they sense that something adult and irreversible is happening and they are trying to map it in real time. "Ryan," my wife said, and then she said his name like she was proud of it. "This is Owen. We've been together for 8 months. She squared her shoulders in that way she'd developed sometime over the past year. That new posture I hadn't been able to name until this exact moment. "I want a divorce. Kids, Owen is going to be your stepdad." The room went completely still. Not quiet, still. The way air goes still before something structural gives way. I looked at Owen. He was about 34, my age, with the kind of jawline that does well in profile photos and the expression of a man who had walked into this room believing he held all the advantages and was now revising that belief in real time as he watched my face. He was not finding what he expected there. I turned to the sideboard, picked up the Blantons, reached across and retrieved 3 glasses, one for my father-in-law Dennis, who was frozen in his armchair like a man who had swallowed something that disagreed with him, one for my mother-in-law Gail, whose face had gone the color of old wax, and one for myself. I poured 3 fingers in each. I left Owen's glass empty and did not touch the 4th one. "Well," I said, raising mine, "it's Christmas. Let's have a toast." I turned and looked directly at Owen, to the man who spent 8 months in my house, at my dinner table, in my driveway, while I was coaching my son's soccer games and teaching my daughter to ride a bike. I let the sentence sit for a moment. "You're a brave man, Owen. It takes something special to look a man's children in the eyes." Owen opened his mouth. He closed it. I continued. "And I want to say, in front of everyone in this room, that I know about the Marriott on Clarkson Boulevard. I know about the November conference my wife apparently attended in Scottsdale. And I know about the 6-month car lease she opened in February in her name only, for a vehicle currently registered to this address that I was told was for her morning commute." Gail made a small sound behind me. "I know," I said quietly, "because I have been paying attention for considerably longer than any of you assumed." Owen reached behind himself, found his coat on the hook by the door, and was through the front entrance so quickly I didn't hear the door close behind him. Just gone. My wife stood in the living room looking at the space where he had been. I put my glass down. "Caleb, Sophie, go upstairs. I'll come up in 10 minutes. They went, both of them, without argument, because that is what children do when a parent speaks from a place that has no trembling in it. My wife said my name. I looked at her. "Not tonight," I said, and I meant all the things that contained. "My name is Ryan Calloway. I am 34 years old. I am an architect, residential and light commercial, and I have spent the better part of my professional life understanding that the most important things about a structure are almost never visible from the outside. I should have applied that understanding at home sooner. I met Dana in our late 20s at a friend's housewarming in Denver, which is the kind of meeting that feels like fate when you're 28 and considerably less like fate at 34. She was finishing her MBA. She was sharp and funny and had the particular energy of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has chosen to let you stand next to them while they get there. We married after 2 years. Caleb came 14 months after that. Sophie 2 years after Caleb. We moved from Denver to a 4-bedroom Craftsman in Littleton, Colorado, a house I had partly designed the remodel for, a house with a west-facing deck I refinished by hand the summer Sophie was born. I want you to understand that this was, by any measure, a good life. I had built it deliberately, chosen it, every room of it. And the truth is, and I am going to be honest because that's the only reason to tell this, I had known something was wrong for longer than I wanted to admit. Not known knew, but felt something that I shelved knew. The first thing I noticed was in April. Dana had always been someone who charged her phone on the kitchen counter. It was a habit so ingrained it was practically furniture. Phone face up on the counter, charger plugged into the outlet below the cabinet, a thing as consistent as the coffee maker. Sometime in April, the phone disappeared from the counter. I noticed. I told myself it was nothing. People change habits. The second thing was in June. We had a standing Saturday morning thing. Coffee, the back deck. 45 minutes before the kids woke up. She started skipping it. "Work emails," she said. "A proposal due." I accepted that. I had always been someone who accepted things. My father was that kind of man too. The accepting kind, and he had a good marriage because of it. Or so I had always believed. The kind of marriage built on choosing not to interrogate every shadow. What I understand now is that there is a difference between trust and avoidance. I had been practicing the second one and calling it the first. The third thing was in August. at Caleb's birthday party. Dana's phone lit up on the patio table while she was inside refilling the lemonade pitcher. The screen was visible for a second before it dimmed. One sentence. Can't stop thinking about last night. I looked at the screen. Then I looked up at our backyard full of 10-year-olds and water guns, the inflatable obstacle course I had spent 40 minutes assembling, the birthday banner I'd strung between the fence posts. I looked back at the phone. The screen had gone dark. I did not pick it up. I told myself I had misread it, that it was from a friend, that I had seen the thing I had been subconsciously looking for, because once you start looking, the brain finds patterns regardless. I told myself that through August and September and October when she came home from a 3-day conference in Scottsdale, and something about the way she unpacked her bag too quickly, deliberately, like someone managing an inventory, made the back of my neck go cold. I said nothing. I waited for a reason to stop waiting. Christmas Eve gave me one I hadn't asked for. After Caleb and Sophie were in bed, and I sat on the edge of each of their beds longer than usual, talking about nothing in particular, just being in the room, I came back downstairs. Dana was sitting at the kitchen table. Her parents had left within 20 minutes of Owen's departure. Gail had squeezed my arm at the door in a way that said, "I am so sorry. I knew nothing. I am so sorry." Dennis had shaken my hand without making eye contact, which was its own kind of answer. Dana looked up when I came in. "Ryan, I know how this looked. It looked exactly like what it was," I said. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. My kitchen table. The one I had found at an estate sale in 2019 and spent a weekend refinishing in the garage. I want to note that detail, not for drama, but because every surface of this house had my hands in it somewhere, and I needed, in that moment, to feel the solidity of that. "How long?" I asked. She told me 8 months, which matched what she'd said in the living room. I do not know if that was the truth or the palatable version of it. "Owen," I said. "He's in marketing. We met at the Scottsdale conference." "In August." She looked at the table. "You said June," I said. "But Scottsdale was in November. So 8 months is..." "Ryan, March," I said. "March is 8 months from November." She didn't answer, which was its own answer. I sat with that. "The car," I said. She went still. "The Subaru. You told me you needed something for winter commuting, that the lease on the Honda was up and you found a deal." I said, "Fine, you handle it. I've got the deck project." I looked at her. "Whose name is on the insurance?" She looked at the table again. "Because when I added our cars to the renewal last month," I said, "the Subaru showed a primary driver with a different address. An address I looked up out of curiosity because I thought it might be an error." I paused. It wasn't an error. Dana pressed her fingers against the side of her coffee cup. "You've been planning this," I said, not as an accusation, as a statement of fact that I was arranging in real time. "Ryan, tonight wasn't impulsive," I said. "You chose Christmas Eve in front of my in-laws and our children because you calculated that I would react badly in front of them. You wanted a scene. You wanted me to give you something to point to. The silence between us was different after that." I looked at her. This woman whose habits I knew as well as my own, whose coffee order and sleep patterns and childhood memories and career anxieties I had filed away over 12 years of shared life, and I felt something I can only describe as the feeling of seeing a building you designed and discovering that someone had been quietly modifying the load-bearing walls. "I need to make a call," I said. I went to the garage, sat in the cold dark in the driver's seat of my truck, and called the only person I wanted to talk to at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve, my older brother, Marcus. Marcus is 38, a commercial litigator in Denver, and the least dramatic person I have ever known, which is exactly what I needed. He answered on the third ring. I could hear his kids in the background. "You okay?" he said. "No," I said. "I need a name, a good family attorney, someone methodical." A pause. "Marcus does not ask unnecessary questions. It is one of his finest qualities." "How soon?" "Tomorrow would be fine," I said. "This week is necessary. I'll text you someone tonight," he said. "Thanks." "Ryan," he paused. "Are the kids okay?" "They're asleep," I said. "They will be." "Good. That's what matters first." It was. I drove back inside and went upstairs and slept in the guest room with the door closed, and I did not lie awake, which surprised me. I think my body understood that whatever came next was going to require rest, and it made a decision without consulting my feelings. Marcus's text arrived at 11:43 p.m. "Patricia Souza. She's in Greenwood Village. 12 years family law. She's thorough. She's not showy, and she doesn't lose things she shouldn't lose. Tell her Marcus Calloway referred you." I texted Patricia Souza's office at 8:05 a.m. on December 26th. By 8:40, her assistant had called back and scheduled an appointment for the following morning. I told Dana I had a worksite walk I'd forgotten to reschedule. She did not question it. We were both by that point performing a version of Ordinary that neither of us believed. Patricia Souza's office was on the 3rd floor of a building off Arapahoe Road, and she was a woman in her late 40s with the composed, unhurried manner of someone who has heard every possible version of human domestic catastrophe and has developed a working theory of each. She read through the documentation I brought, our joint tax returns, our account statements for the past 4 months, the property deed, printouts of the car lease I had located through our shared insurance portal, and made notes in a legal pad with a precise, narrow hand. When she looked up, she said, "What do you know about the vehicle?" "The primary driver listed is Owen Barrett at an address in Highlands Ranch. Is this vehicle being paid for from a joint account?" I thought about that. I said, "I'm not certain." "That's the first thing we find out," she said. "If marital funds funds are being used to pay for a vehicle that is effectively being used as part of an undisclosed arrangement, we have a documentation issue and potentially a dissipation argument. I wrote down dissipation of marital assets. I had not heard that term before. I would hear it many more times. Patricia continued. Colorado is an equitable distribution state with a mandatory financial disclosure process. I want you to do 3 things before we speak again. Do not move money. Do not change anything that could look like you were positioning financially. And go home tonight and log on to every joint account you have access to and tell me what you see. What am I looking for? Anything that looks like it has a destination you don't recognize. I sat at my home office desk at 9:30 p.m. that night after the kids were in bed with every joint account open in 4 tabs. It took me 22 minutes to find it. Our joint savings account had seen 6 transfers over the previous 9 months, each between $1,200 and $20,800, each payable to an entity called Meridian Creative Partners, LLC. I typed the name into the Colorado Secretary of State's business registry. Meridian Creative Partners, LLC had been registered in January of that year. Its registered agent was Dana Calloway. My wife had opened a business I didn't know existed and had been moving money into it from our joint savings for 9 months. My hands went very still on the keyboard, not shaking, still. The specific stillness that comes when a fact is too large to fully receive in the moment and the body goes quiet while the brain does the inventory. I sat there for a moment and thought about something Patricia had said. Anything that looks like it has a destination you don't recognize. $14,300 by my quick total. Destination, an LLC. I didn't know my wife owned. I took screenshots on my phone, emailed them to a personal account. Then I typed up a summary document, amounts, dates, the LLC name, the registration date, and sent everything to Patricia at 10:17 p.m. with a subject line that said, "Found something. Call when you can." She called at 7:52 the next morning. "Is there any business context I should know about?" she asked. "Did she discuss starting a company recently?" "No," I said. "Did she ever mention Meridian Creative Partners?" "Never." A short pause. "Ryan, we're going to need a forensic accountant. I work with a man named David Rourke, CPA, 12 years forensic, very systematic. I'd like to bring him in to trace the full transaction history. Whatever it takes," I said. "I want to file a petition this week, before anyone else moves first." I thought about the version of Dana who had planned Christmas Eve, the timing, the audience, the children present, the performance of it. A woman who had planned that carefully had probably been planning other things carefully too. "File," I said. The petition was filed December 30th. Dana was served at the house at 2:09 p.m. while I was at the grocery store with Caleb and Sophie, who had both decided they needed everything in the cereal aisle simultaneously and were conducting negotiations about shelf space. I know the exact time because Patricia's paralegal sent me a message while I was standing in front of the Cheerios. I put my phone in my pocket and helped Caleb identify the specific variant of Honey Nut he required, and we drove home and I made dinner, and I did not say anything to Dana about what had happened that afternoon until the children were asleep. When I came back downstairs, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope and the petition open in front of her. She looked up. "You filed," she said. "My attorney filed," I said. "You froze the accounts. The court froze the accounts. There's a distinction." She looked at the pages in front of her, then back at me. "You found Meridian," she said. It wasn't a question. $14,300, I said. 9 months. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. "Dana," I said, keeping my voice level in the way I had been practicing for a week. "You did not just have an affair. You spent 9 months building a financial exit strategy from a joint account for money that is as much mine as it is yours." I sat down across from her. "That has a name in Colorado family law. My attorney will be happy to discuss it with yours." She made 3 attempts over the next 20 minutes to reframe what Meridian was. A freelance business she'd been developing, a way of building independence, something she'd planned to disclose. And I listened to all 3 without expression because I understood they were not explanations. They were negotiations. She was feeling out what I knew and calibrating accordingly. I did not tell her what David Rourke had been retained to find. I let her wonder. Owen called me on December 31st. I want to be precise about this because it was the strangest moment of that entire period. A man I had met for approximately 90 seconds in my living room on Christmas Eve called my personal cell phone at 2:17 in the afternoon on New Year's Eve. I answered because I was curious. His voice had lost the rehearsed confidence. He sounded like a man who had spent a week in the aftermath of a decision that had gone sideways and was trying to renegotiate from a weakened position. "Ryan," he said, "I think we should talk." "About what?" "I just want you to know that I had no idea this was going to happen on Christmas. That wasn't my idea. The way she introduced things. That was Dana's call, and I want you to know I disagreed with it." I let that sit for a moment. "Owen," I said, "I appreciate that, but I don't think you calling me is something either of our attorneys would recommend." A pause. "Are you saying I need an attorney?" I thought about Meridian Creative Partners, LLC, about the car lease with his address as primary driver, about the transfers. "I'm saying," I said carefully, "that you should probably talk to someone who can advise you on whether you have any exposure in this situation." The line went quiet. "What kind of exposure?" he asked. "That," I said, "is exactly the kind of of question for your attorney. I ended the call. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Home Depot I had driven to for no particular reason, stared at the windshield for approximately 2 minutes, and then I called my brother. He called you? Marcus said. He called me. Good Lord. I told him to get a lawyer. Smart. A pause. How are the kids? They're okay, I said. Sophie asked me if Owen was ever coming back. I told her probably not. She said good, because he didn't take his shoes off when he came in. Marcus laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in a week. How are you? He asked. I thought about the honest version of the answer, about the particular grief of standing in your own life and realizing someone has been quietly dismantling it while you were looking at ceilings and planning spring projects. I'm functional, I said. Right now, that's the goal. That's enough, he said. For right now, that's enough. David Rourke's CPA had the energy of a man who found irregular financial behavior genuinely interesting, which is the exact quality you want in a forensic accountant and the opposite of what you want in a neighbor. He was 51, methodical, and communicated through detailed spreadsheets with color-coded columns, which I, as an architect, found deeply satisfying. His full analysis came back in early February. It was worse than I had found on my own. Going back 14 months, 2 months further than I had checked, the total redirected from our joint accounts to Meridian Creative Partners LLC and 2 additional payment destinations was $31,400. $31,400. One of the additional destinations was a payment portal registered to a personal training studio in Highlands Ranch near Owen's listed address. The transactions were labeled membership fees. The studio had no public membership rate that corresponded to the amounts paid. The second was 3 cash withdrawals at ATMs near the office Dana shared with her marketing firm's downtown location, pulled out in amounts just below the reporting threshold, $2,900 each, 3 times across 6 weeks. Patricia reviewed the report and called me immediately. This is a comprehensive dissipation case, she said. Not just the LLC. The pattern of withdrawals, the timing, the shell category payments. David's analysis establishes intent. This isn't someone who overspent on personal items. This is documented financial preparation for an exit from the marriage. She paused. Her attorney's going to want to settle fast. Let them want, I said. Dana's attorney, a man named Greg Pelham, who I later learned had a reputation for quick, efficient settlements, made first contact on January 9th. His initial proposal arrived through Patricia. It was almost reasonable. If you didn't know about the $31,000, if you didn't have David Rourke's annotated spreadsheet, if you didn't know about Meridian Creative Partners LLC and the training studio in Highlands Ranch and the sub-threshold cash withdrawals, if you believed the car in Owen Barrett's driveway was a simple lease decision, the proposal offered me alternating custody with Dana as primary residential parent, a buyout of my share of the home equity at a valuation 6 months old, and a division of assets that made no reference whatsoever to any of the transfers. Under actions, Patricia wrote one line in the margin of her copy. This is an insult dressed as generosity. She called me after sending her summary. Reject, I said. Counter? Not yet, I said. Let them think we're reviewing. There was a pause, and I heard something in Patricia's voice that a less methodical attorney might have called satisfaction. Okay, she said. I'll tell them we're reviewing. There is a moment, somewhere in January, that I think about more than the others. It was a Tuesday night, 9 o'clock. The kids were asleep. Dana was upstairs. I was at the kitchen table with David Rourke's report and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I want to talk to you. Please, this has gone too far. Owen. I stared at it. Then I set the phone face down and finished reading the report. I did not reply. I want to be honest about what I felt in those weeks, because this story goes sideways if I present it as the smooth, unshakable competence of a man who was never afraid. I was afraid every day, not of the legal process, of the verdict on my own judgment, of the question that kept finding me in the quiet hours. How did you not see this? Not all of it, but enough of it. That is the thing no one prepares you for. Not the betrayal itself that arrives with its own brutal clarity, but the retrospective audit of your own blindness. The inventory of every moment you could have looked directly at something and chose to look slightly past it. I had been very good at looking slightly past things. I went to a therapist for the first time in February. His name was Dr. Nathan Webb, and he had 17 years in private practice with a specific background in what he called attachment disruption in long-term partnerships. He was direct and unsentimental in a way I found immediately useful. Tell me about when you first noticed something was wrong, he said in our first session. I told him about the phone on the counter disappearing in April, about the birthday party text in August, about the Scottsdale story. And at each of those moments, he said, what did you do with what you noticed? Filed it, I said. Told myself I was being paranoid. Why paranoid? He asked. I thought about my father, about the kind of marriage I'd watched growing up, accommodating, non-confrontational, built on the assumption that mentioning a problem was more disruptive than tolerating it, because asking felt like an accusation, I said. And accusations, he said, felt like what? Like the kind of man I didn't want to be. He wrote something down. There is a difference, he said, between trusting your partner and refusing to trust your own perceptions. The first is healthy, the second is a coping strategy. I sat with that for a long time. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in March at a neutral office in Cherry Creek. I wore a dark blazer and a tie I'd owned for 5 years. Not a performance. Just the clothes that made me feel like myself. Patricia was already there when I arrived. She had the organized stillness of someone who had prepared completely and had nothing left to arrange. Dana came in 3 minutes after me. We had not been in the same room for a deliberate purpose since Christmas Eve. We had occupied the same house, managed the children's logistics and the business-like shorthand divorcing parents develop, passed in hallways, but we had not sat across a table with attorneys between us. She looked tired, not defeated. Tired in the particular way of someone who has been managing a story in multiple directions for 9 months and is running out of the energy required to maintain it. Owen was not there. He had no legal standing. The mediator was a woman named Carol Hutchins, 24 years family and civil mediation, who had the expansive patience of someone who had absorbed more human conflict than most people encounter in a lifetime and remained unimpressed by its various forms. She outlined the process. She was not a judge. She would facilitate, not decide. Her job was to determine whether a negotiated resolution was possible before a formal hearing. Dana's side went first. Greg Pelham was professional and measured, and made 2 arguments which I had anticipated. First, that the Meridian transfers represented legitimate business development on Dana's part, exploratory freelance work that had no relation to marital finances. Second, that given the demands of my architectural practice and what he characterized as my irregular work schedule, primary residential custody with Dana would serve the children's need for stability. Patricia let him finish. Then she placed David Rourke's full analysis on the table. $31,400. 14 months of documented transactions. The annotated timeline establishing that the first Meridian transfer occurred within 6 weeks of Dana's first contact with Owen Barrett. Mr. Rourke is prepared to appear as an expert witness, Patricia said, and walk the court through each transaction in sequence, including the structured ATM withdrawals and the payment destinations associated with a property at Mr. Barrett's Highlands Ranch address. Greg Pelham looked at the report. He looked at Dana. He made a very small adjustment to his posture that told me he had not expected the depth of documentation we had. Attorneys have physical tells just like everyone else. The custody argument, Patricia continued, is unsupported by any record of primary caregiving by my client's spouse. Ryan Calloway has coached Caleb's soccer team for 3 seasons. He designed and built the majority of structural renovations on the family home. He has school records, medical appointment logs, and 5 months of contemporaneous parenting documentation. He is not, by any reasonable standard, a secondary parent. She set a second folder on the table. Carol Hutchins made a note. Greg Pelham asked for a recess. In the hallway, Patricia stood beside me at the window. Pelham didn't know about the structured withdrawals, she said quietly. I could see it. Is that good? It means she didn't tell her attorney everything. That changes his confidence in his own case. 22 minutes later, they came back with a revised proposal. Primary residential custody to me. Dana with alternating weekends and Wednesday evenings. Child support per Colorado guidelines. The marital home to be sold with proceeds divided, and Ryan to receive a credit against the documented dissipation, yielding me a meaningfully larger share of the net equity. Dana's 401k to be divided equitably per QDRO. No custody challenge language, no characterization of my work schedule as a variable, and one additional provision we had requested. Explicit written acknowledgement in the settlement agreement that the Meridian transfers and associated payments constituted dissipation of marital assets, for the record. Greg Pelham presented this without editorializing, the way attorneys do when the ground has genuinely shifted. Patricia read through without expression, made 2 margin notes, asked for clarification on 1 retirement account valuation date, received it. Then she looked at me. I looked across the table at Dana. She was looking at the window, not at me, not at the documents. At the window and the gray Denver sky on the other side. I had looked at that woman across 12 years of tables, and I knew the shape of her face in every light we'd shared. Morning light, kitchen light, hospital light when Caleb was born, and then when Sophie was born. The particular low light of Sunday mornings in winter. I did not feel triumph. I felt the strange, clean sorrow of a structure that has been correctly assessed and must now come down. I nodded once. We accept, Patricia said, with the dissipation acknowledgement as written. Greg Pelham looked at Dana. A very long moment. Accepted, Dana said. Her voice was flat in the way of someone who has stopped performing anything at all. Carol Hutchins noted the agreement for the record. Patricia and Greg Pelham shook hands, and that was the moment everything stopped being a marriage. The settlement was finalized and signed on March 19th. I arrived at Patricia's office 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room looking at a framed print of the Rockies I'd seen a dozen times without really seeing. When they brought me into the conference room, Dana was not there. We had agreed to sign separately. I had requested it. She had not objected. Patricia walked me through the document, line by line, every number, every custody provision, every mention of Meridian Creative Partners LLC and the explicit dissipation clause. I picked up the pen. I held it for a moment, not from hesitation, from something more like acknowledgement that I was standing at the border between two versions of my life and that the man on the other side of this signature was going to have to build something new and he was capable of it, and that was enough to know. I signed. Patricia walked me to the door, shook my hand, and said, "You handled this with a lot of discipline. Most people don't." "I had good help," I said. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for a few minutes. March in Denver. Pale sky. Still some snow on the peaks visible to the west. An ordinary Thursday afternoon looking exactly like itself. I didn't call anyone right away. I sat with the quiet of it. Then I drove to Caleb's school. I had cleared my afternoon and arranged with his teacher to pull both kids early. I took them to a pizza place on South Broadway that they considered the highest form of restaurant available to humanity, and we sat in a booth for 2 hours while Caleb narrated a soccer match in real time using hand gestures, and Sophie organized her pizza toppings into categories and then ate the categories in a specific order. At some point, Sophie reached across and put her small hand on top of mine, briefly, the way 7-year-olds do when they feel something they don't have language for. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked. I thought about the honest answer. "I'm really going to be," I said. She considered this. "Okay," she said, and went back to her category system. Caleb knocked over his water glass. All three of us laughed. It was the realest thing I had felt in months. It has been just over a year. The house sold in May. After the settlement credit and the mortgage payoff, I had enough for a down payment on a townhouse in Washington Park. Smaller, narrower, with better light than I expected, and a garage I have already started converting into a home design studio. I reopened my architecture practice to full capacity in the spring. I had let client relationships drift over the years in the way you let things drift when you are the secondary earner and the household has organized itself around a different center of gravity. By summer, I had 3 active residential projects. By fall, a 4th. The work is better now, I think. Not because my life is better, it's different. And different is not the same as better. But because I am making decisions from a position of clarity, and clarity does something to the quality of work that comfort and avoidance never could. Caleb made his soccer team's starting lineup in the fall. Sophie has become, inexplicably, obsessed with the piano, and I have arranged lessons for her 3 blocks from the townhouse, and I sit in the hallway every Thursday and listen through the door. They see their mother on alternating weekends. Our co-parenting conversations are brief and functional. That is fine. Functional is the goal, not warmth we haven't earned back. My brother Marcus came to visit in October with his family. We spent a weekend in the mountains, and he didn't once ask me how I was really doing, which is the only way to actually ask that question. Nathan Webb, my therapist, and I still meet twice a month. He has helped me understand something I keep returning to. The acceptance I confused with trust was a form of self-erasure, not generosity. Erasure. I was making myself smaller so the structure around me felt stable, and structures built on someone making themselves smaller are not stable. They are postponed. As for Owen and Dana, I know what Caleb mentions obliquely, the way 10-year-olds pass information without seeming to. The relationship did not survive the legal process. The discovery disclosure on Meridian, the document acknowledgement, the structured withdrawals placed into the record, none of that made it easier for 2 people to build something on the far side of what they'd done. Meridian Creative Partners LLC was dissolved in August. Owen's address appears to have changed. I find I have no strong feeling about any of it. Choices have geometry. You can see the shape of them clearly from a distance you couldn't access while you were inside them. I am in a townhouse in Washington Park, watching mountain light come through a west window in the late afternoon. I have 2 children who are, by every reasonable measure, okay. I have work that is mine, and a practice I rebuilt from the roots. That is what I kept. That is what I built. If there is anything worth taking from this, dignity is not the absence of fear. I was afraid every day. Dignity is continuing to make precise decisions while you are afraid, because precision is the only currency that doesn't devalue under pressure. On Christmas Eve, in my own living room, I poured a glass I didn't drink and gave a toast nobody forgot. I didn't win because I was clever. I won because I finally stopped letting someone else define the terms of a life I had spent 12 years building with my own hands. And it turns out, those hands still work just fine.